Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the extraordinary mind of Simone Weil. You might know her name, maybe heard whispers of her unique philosophy, or perhaps you've encountered her really profound writing. She was an intellectual titan, a mystic, a factory worker, a resistor, just all rolled into one uncompromising spirit. And what we have for this deep dive is, well, it's a fascinating stack of sources. We've got powerful excerpts from her seminal work, The Need for Roots, a deep look into her complex relationship with Georges Bataille, insightful academic analyses, and even some poignant personal accounts from people who knew her. Our mission really is to explore Weil's main themes and ideas, understand why they're still so incredibly relevant today, maybe look at some practical examples that bring these concepts to life, and see how her thoughts stacked up against, other famous schools of thought and philosophers. It's a profound journey, sometimes challenging, definitely, but one that offers some incredible aha moments, I think.
Indeed. Weil's ideas are challenging, no doubt about it. Often paradoxical, they really demand your full attention, but they're also deeply insightful, profoundly rewarding. And she wasn't just a theorist sitting in an armchair, right? She lived her philosophy often to, well, extreme lengths. It makes her work not just intellectual, but this powerful testament to lived experience and commitment. What's truly fascinating, I find, is how she consistently sought to connect the most abstract, philosophical, even spiritual truth to the most concrete, raw human realities. Things like suffering, labor, the pervasive nature of force. Her observations, penned nearly a century ago, speak so directly, so powerfully to the challenges we face now. Information overload, social fragmentation, the erosion of meaning, the search for genuine connection. We'll explore how her rigorous, uncompromising approach offers these unique pathways to a deeper understanding ourselves, our communities, our place in the universe. Her insights really prompt you to rethink, well, everything, from national identity to the nature of suffering itself.
Okay, so let's start there. To begin exploring Weil's worldview, a really crucial entry point is this concept she called rootedness. Now, when we hear that word, maybe we think of a literal place, home, family tree, that sort of thing. But Weil took this idea much, much deeper, didn't she? What exactly did she mean by this food for the soul?
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. For Weil, rootedness is fundamentally about connection.
Yeah.
But not just any connection. It's about a deep, vital link to what she called a human collectivity, which is way more than just a group of people. It's a shared culture, a living past, inherited traditions, this sense of belonging to something larger, something enduring. She argues quite powerfully that the food which a collectivity supplies for the souls of those who form part of it has no equivalent in the entire universe.
Wow, no equivalent.
None. It's unique, utterly irreplaceable in her view. You can think of it as this sort of spiritual nourishment, an unseen anchor. It gives individuals a profound sense of identity, continuity, purpose. And what's key here is how she distinguishes these true needs of the soul from just, desires or fleeting fancies.
Okay, so needs versus desires. How does that work?
Well, unlike desires, which can be insatiable, right?
Yeah.
Like a miser wanting more gold, it never satisfies. Genuine needs are limited. And crucially, she says they're often arranged in these antithetical pairs that have to be balanced for real health.
Antithetical pairs, like opposites.
Exactly. Like our bodies need both warmth and coolness, right? Rest and exercise. The soul, she argues, needs similar balanced pairs. Rootedness gives stability, belonging. But maybe that needs to be balanced with openness to the new, or tradition versus progress. Without that balance, like too much heat or too much rest, the soul gets unhealthy, prone to, well, spiritual problems. It's this limitation, this need for balance, whether physical or spiritual, that marks a true human requirement for Weil. And you can see how relevant that is now in our, fragmented world.
Absolutely. And if rootedness is this vital nourishment, then its opposite, what she called uprootedness, well, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. Spiritual famine, social breakdown. She wasn't just theorizing, was she? She saw this playing out in her own time, particularly in France.
Oh, absolutely. Weil viewed uprootedness not just as a problem, but as a profound, even fatal weakness, a state that makes a society brittle, vulnerable, prone to collapse from within. Her starkest example, something she felt deeply, was the sudden, devastating collapse of France in June 1940.
Right, during World War II.
Yes. She writes with this chilling clarity. She says it simply showed to what extent the country was uprooted. And then that analogy you mentioned, a tree whose roots are almost entirely eaten away falls at the first blow.
Such a powerful image. It wasn't just the external force then.
No, that's her point. It was weakened from within. Its essential connections, its roots, had withered. And she squarely blamed modern civilization with all its toxins for this advanced stage of uprootedness in France. These toxins weren't just abstract for her. It was industrialization, the relentless focus on money, the loss of local traditions, thought becoming detached from lived experience, a general lack of spiritual depth. This internal decay, born from a lack of real connection, the absence of that food for the soul, could be far more destructive than any external enemy. It really suggests that society's strength isn't just military or economic, it's in the unseen bonds, the shared meaning.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? Thinking about our own time, the digital age, sometimes superficial connections.
It really is. Where can true community depth be found sometimes?
Yeah, and she traces this uprootedness back quite far, right? Not just contemporary stuff, but defining moments in French history. How did she see that historical thread?
Yes, she's unsparing in her historical critique. She points specifically to the influence of the encyclopedists in the 18th century. She called them as uprooted intellectuals, kind of obsessed with this abstract idea of progress.
Okay.
She argued their rationalism, their wholesale rejection of tradition, basically killed any chance of inspiration being sought in a revolutionary tradition.
Yeah.
They just made a complete break with the past. And this break, she thought, was made worse by what she called the prolonged terror under Louis XIV. The monarchy's oppressive centralization that had already damaged France's historical continuity suppressed regional identities.
So a double hit, in a way.
Exactly. And the result, in Val's view, was that 1789 really being an open break, meaning the French Revolution, despite its ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity, ironically lacked genuine historical roots. The patriotism that came out of it, she argued, was solely concerned with the present and the future. It was a love of the sovereign nation based on abstract pride, a chosen loyalty, she says, like joining a party or church in our own day, rather than a natural inherited connection to a deep, living past.
That's a provocative point. That kind of patriotism isn't enough, or it's different.
It's different, and for her, weaker. Disconnected from that vital nourishment of tradition. It makes you wonder, even as we push for progress, how much do we value or maybe discard historical continuity?
That distinction between inherited and chosen connection or patriotism is fascinating. Is there a concrete example she gives that really brings this idea to life, makes it tangible?
Yes, she offers a really striking, maybe even counterintuitive example from 1871 after the Franco-Prussian War. Frederick, the German Prince Imperial, who she knows was humane and intelligent, was genuinely surprised by the intense French patriotism he found in Alsace.
Alsace, which speaks a German dialect, right? And had been recently conquered by France.
Exactly. Despite the language, despite being relatively recently French, the Alsatians refused to have anything to do with Germany after being annexed back. They kept this fierce loyalty to France. And Ralph found the reason wasn't language or ancient ties in that specific place. It was an idea. It was their pride felt in belonging to the country which had produced the French Revolution, to the sovereign nation.
So patriotism based on an ideal, a narrative.
Precisely. A shared narrative of a liberating ideal had become this powerful source of identity for them. She even notes that being annexed by Germany, being separated from France, paradoxically helped them preserve this state of mind right up to 1918. It's a powerful illustration of how a shared story, even a relatively recent or abstract one, can create deep, enduring roots. It shows the power of an ideal to forge belonging. Roots can grow in ideological soil, too.
Okay, so if patriotism shifts towards this abstract ideal, this choice, what does that mean for justice, especially for people at the bottom who feel the state's sharp edges most?
Well, Weil argued that when the people constituted as a sovereign nation were synonymous with the country, it created this dangerous illusion. The relationship to justice got obscured. The assumption was, well, a sovereign nation must be just, right? It wouldn't commit injustice. Injustice came from not having that perfect nation yet.
Right. The ideal itself is presumed good.
Yes. But as soon as the old state, the actual apparatus of power, stood behind the country, distinct from the people, then justice is far away. In modern patriotism, Molyneux observed, justice hasn't much of a part to play. It often gets sidelined for national pride or perceived national interest. And she noted, drawing on her own experience, that you wouldn't dare make such an assertion before a gathering of workmen who, beneath their social oppression, feel the state's cold, metallic touch.
They feel the reality, not just the ideal.
Exactly. For these workers facing daily exploitation, patriotism alone felt hollow. It wasn't enough. They needed to feel they were part of something very much greater, taking part in the universal struggle against injustice. This highlights her view. True justice is universal. It transcends national pride. and it resonates most urgently with those facing oppression directly.
So if patriotism doesn't serve justice for the vulnerable, it's hollow or even dangerous.
For Weil, yes, it's a potentially dangerous ideal if detached from that universal sense of justice.
Okay, that's a stark point about patriotism's limits. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about force. It's a word we use constantly, but Simone Weil had a very specific, very comprehensive understanding of it, didn't she? It wasn't just physical violence.
No, not at all. Her definition of force goes way beyond common use. She defined it with this chilling precision as that which has the specific power to abolish humanness, transforming persons into soulless things.
Abolish humanness. Wow. Turning people into things.
Exactly. That's the core of it. It's not just something that hurts you physically. It strips you of your essence, turns a thinking, feeling human into a mere object, a puppet. And this force, she argued, operates not just externally through obvious things like natural disasters, social oppression, military violence,
Right.
but also profoundly, insidiously, internally. She included bodily needs, especially hunger.
Hunger as force.
Yes. Based on her own experiences in factories and deliberately limiting her food, she called hunger a defilement and diminution of the human, because it could reduce a person to just primal urges, obliterating dignity, higher thought, subjection to overwhelming physical needs, extreme hunger, exhaustion that could be as dehumanizing as direct violence. She saw force marking the limit or breaking point of humanity. But paradoxically, she also saw it as just, part of the human situation, unavoidable. This broad definition let her explore force everywhere, its subtle influence on every aspect of life, body, and society.
So how does this incredibly broad, dehumanizing concept of force then translate into her understanding of social oppression, which often seems more about systems than outright violence?
She links them directly, powerfully.
Right.
She states flatly, oppression is exercised by force. And she defines oppression broadly as the negation of Kant's principle, Kant's idea that humans should always be treated as ends in themselves, never just means.
Right, not just tools for someone else's purpose.
Exactly. So oppression is anything that reduces people to tools, stripping them of their value and agency. And it's not just overt violence armies, police. For Weil, it crucially includes social and economic structures. Class relationships, yes, but especially the regime of modern production itself. That is, large industry with its division of labor.
The factory system itself.
Yes. She believed this fundamental force, rooted in how work is organized, the assembly line, the hierarchy, the repetitive, mindless tasks, couldn't be abolished just by changing who owns the factory. This directly challenged traditional Marxism, which focused mainly on property.
Interesting. So even worker ownership wouldn't fix it if the work itself was dehumanizing?
That was her argument. If the structure of the work still turns individuals into passive cogs in a machine they don't understand, then true liberation remains elusive. The very structure of modern work could be inherently oppressive, stripping meaning and agency regardless of who's nominally in charge.
She famously explored this pervasive nature of force through literature, didn't she? Especially Homer's The Iliad. What did she find there?
Oh, her essay on the Iliad, the poem of force, is just profound and chilling. She read it not just as an epic, but as a philosophical treatise on what force does to people. She saw how in war, the human spirit is swept away, blinded by the very force it imagined it could handle. It's deformed by the weight of the force it submits to.
It takes over.
It takes over. Force possesses humans by metamorphosing them, literally changing their nature, turning thinking beings into objects. Words become powerless, like trying to talk to stone. Warriors caught in combat either descend to the level of inert matter, becoming passive victims, or to the level of blind force, becoming uncontrolled agents of destruction.
Like objects or elemental forces.
Exactly. And Homer's similes reflect this, right? Warriors aren't compared to heroes, but to fire, flood, wind, things without thought or will, or to passive things like frightened animals, trees, water. No agency. She called the conscious practice of this reduction, this alchemy, the art of war, emphasizing how it obliterates the human spirit, reduces people to either pure violence or inert matter. It shows how these ancient concerns were timeless for her, relevant to modern war, but also the factory floor.
It's one thing to analyze force in literature, even brilliantly, but Simone Weil experienced it firsthand. How did those personal, visceral encounters shape her understanding, give it that unique weight?
You're absolutely right. Those experiences were decisive. Her time on the assembly line, the brutal, mind-numbing labor, and her courageous but short time on the front lines in the Spanish Civil War, seeing extreme violence, deprivation.
These weren't just intellectual exercises for her.
Not at all. They led her to this bitter, undeniable realization. All levels of human existence, including the most elevated and spiritual, are vulnerable to force. Before that, she admitted, she hadn't fully grasped force's insidious power to abolish rational thought, dignity, compassion, and the aspiration to freedom, to literally obliterate the human spirit.
So the lived experience changed everything.
It gave her critique profound potency, grounding it in reality. It moved beyond theory. And this is where her political impulses, wanting justice, liberation, and her mystical impulses started to converge. She began to see how force, paradoxically, could maybe be used in a liberative way for spiritual transformation. By exposing oneself to it through attention, one could undergo a kind of purification. Her refusal to separate physical, political, spiritual force led to these really original, provocative ideas about freedom and truth. She lived her philosophy.
And tied closely to force is her unique understanding of affliction, malheur, which she saw as having this profound, almost sacred function, not just something bad to be avoided.
Indeed. Affliction, malheur, for Weil, it's much more than just suffering. It's a specific kind of suffering she calls a corrosive force, a mutilation or leprosy of the soul.
Leprosy of the soul, that's intense.
It is. It's so profound, she says, that to listen to someone whose soul is corroded by affliction is to annihilate oneself. The weight is almost unbearable, even for an observer. The afflicted person, she believed, often becomes their soul's accomplice, almost willingly, allowing this poison of inertia to set in, preventing them from seeking help, even wanting it. It can manifest as hating someone who tries to help, or compulsively returning to suffering. It's a state of deep spiritual disfigurement.
But she saw an opportunity there, too.
Yes, and this is where her unique mystical insight shines. She saw affliction as a decisive opportunity to grasp the deepest truth of existence. It's precisely in the depths of malheur that the splendor of God's mercy shines, leading to a core joy, not the affliction itself, but a glimpse of divine love breaking through the darkness.
So a supernatural use for suffering.
Exactly. Not just a remedy to escape it. It's a mechanism for what she called the decreative liquidation of the ego.
We'll need to unpack decreation later.
We will. But it's this voluntary relinquishing of the I, the self, that opens one to grace. She even controversially suggested this could transform something as brutal as war into a sacrificial ceremony unleashing decreative mystical power. It's an agonizing, but ultimately transformative path to deeper reality, to God, an inner stripping that allows profound insights to emerge from apparent devastation.
Okay, given this overwhelming presence of force, this corrosive affliction, what was Weil's antidote? How did she propose we resist or even transform its effects?
Her primary antidote, her method for resistance and transformation, was attention. But she describes it not as just mental focus. It's a quiet, non-grasping openness to the world and other beings, awaiting intent in which the I disappears.
The I disappears, so it's kind of selfless seeing?
Exactly. An active, almost spiritual receptivity. It allows us to genuinely see what is really in front of us, including the humanity of the other being. Where before, maybe blinded by our own fears or prejudices, we saw only the projected images of our own terrors or the phantoms conjured by propaganda.
Which connects back to justice, right?
Absolutely crucial for grounding justice. It forms the fundamental building block for her moral and political thought. If you can't truly see the other person, how can you act justly? It's a transformation of the warrior's soul, she said. Symmetrical, but directly contrary to what force does on the battlefield. Instead of being warped, attention lets us meet reality clearly, openly. Much of her later writing, really, you can see it as this pedagogical attempt to bring attention to light in a world dominated by force.
So it's a discipline, a selfless act of perception.
A disciplined, selfless act, truly listening, truly seeing, without the ego filter.
You mentioned attention being a pedagogical attempt, a discipline. How did she think one cultivates this? And what were the deeper, maybe spiritual implications? It sounds like more than just concentration.
Oh, far more. She insisted, almost radically optimistically, that never, in any case whatever, is a genuine effort of the attention wasted. She's a wonderful example. Imagine struggling with a geometry problem for an hour, getting nowhere, feeling stuck.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Right. Even in that apparently barren effort, she argued, something profound is happening.
Yeah.
It has brought more light into the soul. This intellectual struggle, grappling with difficulty, was for her a refraction of spiritual life, kind of spiritual exercise.
Like mental gymnastics for the soul.
Kind of. She called it a gymnastics of the attention calculated to give it a greater aptitude for prayer. In fact, she believed quite radically that absolutely unmixed attention is prayer. Full stop.
Wow, attention is prayer.
Yes. And extreme attention is what constitutes the creative faculty in man, and the only extreme attention is religious. This suggests deep intellectual rigor and profound spiritual discipline are intertwined. A single path to universal truth, a path accessible even to what she called genius without talent, someone maybe not brilliant, but who perpetually concentrates all their attention upon its attainment with humility, persistence.
So paying attention, even to mundane things, is a spiritual path.
A direct and powerful pathway to spiritual growth, genuine perception, and ultimately the divine. It's a lifelong practice.
This idea of the I disappearing or being destroyed, that's pretty radical, maybe unsettling. How does that connect to Weil's spiritual path and this concept you mentioned, decreation?
It's absolutely core to her spiritual thought, and yes, it is radical. For a while, we possess nothing in the world except the power to say I. And this I, our ego, our self-centeredness, our illusions of control, is precisely what we have to give to God, in other words, to destroy. That's decreation.
Not nihilistic self-destruction, though.
No, exactly. It's about voluntarily diminishing the ego to make room for something greater, for the divine. And she makes a crucial distinction. She thought, nothing is worse than extreme affliction, which destroys the I from outside, because after that, we can no longer destroy it ourselves.
So forced ego destruction by suffering is worse.
Yes, that's a quasi-hell on earth for her.
Yep.
Stripped, vulnerable, without agency. Voluntary decreation, though, is about moving towards greater reality, truth, connection with God. By consciously, humbly uprooting oneself socially and vegetatively, willingly exiling oneself from every earthly country. It's an inner stripping, a nakedness, a profound act of letting go of the ego to open oneself to the divine. She says, nothing can enter into us while armor protects us both from wounds and from the depths which they open up.
You have to be vulnerable.
Yes, that vacuum, the space created by this voluntary stripping away of self, is what grace needs in order to come into us. It's a radical, often painful, but ultimately liberating path to authenticity and true connection with God, moving beyond the limited self.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, I think. Weil had this very unique, almost paradoxical view of God's presence, didn't she? Not always about feeling a comforting presence, often the opposite.
Her profound, often agonizing religious journey led her to this almost unique teaching. It is in God's absence that his love is most strongly and wonderfully shown.
God's absence shows his love. How does that work?
Well, it has echoes of Gnostic alienation, right? Feeling separated from the divine source by the vast gulf of the physical world, the vastness of cosmic space and time. In this vastness, this desert, the far-off gleam of divine light feels like absence, like silence. But for Weil, this very absence signifies a deeper truth. She believed that if we, in an act of ultimate purity, love God while thinking that he does not exist, then only then will he truly manifest his existence to us.
Love God even if you think he's not there.
It's an act of fidelity in the void. A love so pure doesn't demand proof or consolation. God, she believed, withdraws himself in order not to be loved like the treasure is by the miser, not loved selfishly for what he gives us for comfort.
So it's about loving God for God's sake alone.
Exactly. A gratuitous love without expectation. It requires profound faith, radical detachment, loving purely without demanding conventional signs of being loved back. It's challenging, but deeply resonant.
So if that's her view of spiritual love, how does this translate into human relationships, like friendship? What does that radical detachment mean for connecting with others?
Weil speaks of love needing reality. It has to be grounded in the concrete world, our actual interactions. She says, supernatural love touches only creatures and goes only to gate, meaning we love creatures, other people, as intermediaries, as pathways to God, not ultimate ends.
Intermediaries.
Yes. And for this reason, she argues, we should love all creatures equally, itself included, even a stranger as oneself. A profound call to universal compassion, free from attachment. Her concept of pure friendship is unique. She calls it a miracle, a supernatural union between two opposites, necessity and liberty.
Necessity and liberty in friendship.
Meaning it's not born of neediness or clinging. It's an equality made of harmony, where each wishes to preserve the faculty of free consent both in himself and in the other. You respect the other's absolute freedom, their autonomy. She saw this pure friendship as an image of the original and perfect friendship that belongs to the Trinity, the very essence of God.
Wow.
And crucially, she argues friendship is not to be sought, not to be dreamed, not to be desired. It is to be exercised. It is a virtue.
You don't chase it, you do it.
Exactly. A practice of selfless giving. It should be a gratuitous joy like those afforded by art or life, a gift added unto us, not demanded. She even advises, controversially perhaps, learn to thrust friendship aside, or rather the dream of friendship, to be worthy of it.
Let go of the dream to get the reality.
Kind of. It highlights this radical detachment that frees love from possessiveness, expectation, disappointment, allows it to be a pure, unconditioned gift reflecting the divine. Generosity without expecting anything back.
Earlier, you mentioned suffering could be an opportunity, almost sacred. How do suffering and joy connect us to the world's order, even the divine? They seem so different.
Weil considers both equally precious gifts, which is pretty revolutionary. She urges us to savor to the full, each one in its purity. Through joy, she explains, the beauty of the world penetrates our soul. We glimpse the harmony, the goodness, but it's through suffering that this same beauty and order penetrates our body.
Penetrates our body? How?
She argues profoundly that on the plane of physical sensibility, suffering alone gives us contact with that necessity which constitutes the order of the world, for pleasure does not involve an impression of necessity. When we feel pain, affliction, we hit the unyielding laws of the universe. Raw reality, necessity. Pleasure often masks this.
So suffering reveals the underlying structure.
Yes. To truly hear the universe as the vibration of the Word of God, to perceive the divine order in creation, both suffering and joy are indispensable. When they come, we must open the very center of our soul to it, like a lover opening the door to a messenger. She uses this analogy from manual labor. An apprentice gets hurt, the workers say. It is the trade entering his body.
Learning through hardship.
Similarly, Weil suggests when we suffer, it is the universe, the order and beauty of the world, and the obedience of creation to God that are entering our body. It elevates suffering from just misfortune to a profound way of connecting with cosmic order, divine love, finding meaning even in the hardest moments, seeing them as chances for deeper integration with reality.
Her most famous book title, Gravity and Grace, seems to capture this tension perfectly, doesn't it? What's the relationship between these two concepts in her philosophy?
It's absolutely central. Gravity represents the blind mechanism of necessity governing the world. Physical laws, social pressures, internal compulsions, habits, ego. For Weil, everything that we call evil is only this mechanism. Humanity without grace is like a stone that falls, thinking it chooses, but just obeying gravity's pull. She says if we look closely, wherever the virtue of supernatural light is absent, everything is obedient to mechanical laws, as blind and as exact as the laws of gravitation. Our actions, morals, are often just automatic, if not consciously redirected.
Just falling, basically.
Pretty much. Grace, conversely, is the descending movement from God, a supernatural force operating beyond natural laws, allowing defiance of those pulls. It's what the vacuum needs in order to come into us, that space made by decreating the ego. When grace penetrates to the very center of a man, Weil asserts he can walk on the water without violating any of the laws of nature.
Not literally, I assume.
No, it's a metaphor for operating above gravity's constraints, making seemingly impossible acts of virtue, attention, pure love possible. She emphasizes God has committed all phenomena without exception to the mechanism of the world. He doesn't constantly intervene, but his obedience to this mechanism, allowing necessity to operate, is itself the free play he allows necessity. This makes the world, despite its pitilessness, its blind laws, a perfect model for us and an object of love for those who love its master.
So grace works within that necessary structure.
Exactly. It shows how, within a seemingly deterministic universe, divine love and human freedom find their miraculous expression through grace, transcending the purely mechanical.
This concept of the impossible also seems vital for her, like a gateway. How does she use that term?
She suggests, quite provocatively, human life is impossible. Not despair, but an observation that our deepest desires for perfect good, justice, love, understanding are often unattainable in this world by human means alone. They are, from an earthly view, impossible.
But that's the key.
Yes, here's the twist. She argues, impossibility is the door of the supernatural. It's precisely by hitting what seems impossible, by grasping the void which we grasp with the pincers of contradiction, confronting the limit of our logic, our will, our power, that we can move beyond the dream world of our own making, our illusions of self-sufficiency. This confrontation creates the vacuum, the opening, for the supernatural to enter.
So we have to hit the wall, basically.
In a way. That's why she says poetically, we can but knock at it. It is someone else who opens. It challenges us to face limitations, not to give up, but to surrender to a higher truth beyond our grasp, beyond our control. Her own method showed this. As soon as we have thought something, try to find in what sense the contrary is true.
Always looking for the contradiction.
Yes, this paradoxical approach to the impossible is key to her spiritual path, guiding her beyond conventional thought towards radical divine truth, teaching us that real solutions often lie where we least expect, beyond what we think we can achieve.
Okay, let's move into how she engaged with other philosophies. Simone Weil started with strong left-wing sympathies, even worked in factories, as you said, but she became deeply critical of Marxism. What were her main points of departure? How did her experience shape that?
Her direct, often brutal experience in factories and farms was absolutely pivotal. It led to this profound disillusionment with Marxism, especially its leaders. She quickly realized the left-wing leaders' ignorance about the realities of work. Their theories just didn't match the grinding, dehumanizing reality she lived. She fundamentally contested Marx's blind faith in the evolution of productive forces, the idea that technology would automatically bring liberation.
She didn't buy that.
No. She argued the workers' complete subordination is founded on the factory organization and not on the system of property. It was large industry itself, with its intense division of labor, that was the key instrument of domination no matter who owned it. This system reduced workers to passive cogs, performing movements without understanding the whole process. That alienation was fundamental.
More fundamental than economic exploitation.
For her, yes. Furthermore, she critiqued modern science itself as a monopoly of specialists. Non-scientists could only believe, not truly assimilate or understand. Another form of servitude. Now, she did see value in Marx. His truly valuable idea, she thought, was a materialism, as not a doctrine but a method of understanding and of action, focusing on material conditions and the method of production.
The analysis was good, but the doctrine wasn't.
Kind of. She saw genius in his analysis of power structures. But she believed no Marxist had really used it, beginning with Marx himself. They turned it into dogma. She saw Marx mistakenly assuming society would automatically fix itself, lacking the insight that divine strength descends upon those who desire it with complete humility, to escape falsehood and find real liberation.
So a spiritual dimension was missing for her.
Critically missing. It was a profound break for her, moving away from purely political or economic solutions towards inner transformation. Genuine change had to come from within.
That's a powerful critique. Beyond Marxism, she also had this strong, almost prophetic view of collective entities, the great beast. What did that mean? How did she see it in society, even the church?
The great beast is her vivid, chilling term for collective entities, particularly the modern state, and, yes, controversially, the institutional church. She saw them becoming the only object of idolatry, the only ersatz of God.
Ersatz, like a cheap substitute.
Exactly. Something people worship, give ultimate loyalty to, but it's empty, destructive. She explicitly saw the Catholic Church as the direct descendant of the Roman Empire, inheriting its lust for temporal power and totalitarian tendencies. Control, universal dominion.
That's a harsh critique of the church.
Very. She fiercely opposed its historical use of anathemasit, condemning heretics. She believed Christian mysteries were objects of loving contemplation rather than affirmation or denial. Truth explored through attention paradox, not enforced by intellectual coercion. This is why, despite her profound love for Christ, the liturgy, individual Catholics, she could controversially declare, "I have not the slightest love for the Church in the strict sense of the word."
Wow.
She saw social idolatry giving ultimate allegiance to any collective, leading directly to the stifling of religious thought under the sign of orthodoxy. Genuine inquiry suppressed for rigid dogma. Social influence, she said, was both food and poison. It sustains community but corrupts truth. This great beast, state or church, offered a substitute for religion which allows man to transcend his individuality without surrendering himself, and so, at small cost, to dispense with God.
A superficial transcendence.
Exactly. Appeasing the need for something larger, but without the radical self-stripping, the humility needed for true spiritual encounter. It demands conformity, diverts from the personal spiritual search. You can see parallels today with tribalism, political polarization.
Absolutely. It seems she was critical of many modern institutions, yet she found deep resonance in ancient Greek thought. What drew her there? What connections did she make?
Oh, she held Greek thought in incredibly high regard, a source of profound, perennial wisdom lost to modernity. She drew heavily from Plato and the Stoics. For Plato, she stressed, reality is transcendent. This is Plato's fundamental idea. The liberating encounter with an absolute good was this shocking encounter with a reality which is both absolute and good, like Plato's cave allegory.
Which wasn't just theory for her, but a spiritual blueprint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Moving from illusion to truth, even if painful. She also deeply admired the Greek Stoics, their idea of a perfectly beautiful order of the universe where natural law, necessity, divine wisdom, beauty, and love were all unified. She loved their amor fati, the love of the order of the world, not resignation, but joyous affirmation of divine wisdom in creation, even the harsh parts.
And she felt Christianity lost something by distancing itself from that.
Profoundly lamented it. She felt Christianity cut itself off from Stoicism, leading to an abstract and separate existence, detached from the world's concrete order. She believed that from remote antiquity, right up to the latter half of the Renaissance, it was always universally recognized that there is a method to be followed in spiritual matters. This reflects her belief in a universal wisdom that could be recovered through discipline, a holistic vision fusing intellect and spirit, unlike modern fragmentation.
That's fascinating. How did her ideas stand in relation to some of her contemporaries or other influential modern thinkers? Did they create dialogue or maybe snark contrast?
Oh, she definitely didn't exist in a vacuum. Georges Bataille, for instance, the French intellectual known for transgression, eroticism, he was deeply fascinated by her. He saw her as a sacred figure, embodying the prestige and horror of death due to her radical asceticism.
Different interpretations of sacrifice, maybe.
Very different. Bataille adapted Durkheim on sacrifice for rebellious psychological and social dismemberment, ecstatic breakdown. Weil's mysticism drove her to use even war for spiritual purification, ascetic self-fashioning. Her Nurses Project aimed for her self-expenditure to have beauty and a use, a spiritual utility. And Bataille thought combating fascism required killing God to negate authority, a huge divergence from Weil's profound, if paradoxical, faith.
Big difference there. What about someone like Descartes?
Well, in her earlier work, you see a strong flavor of Cartesian individualism, thought as pure, detached mental activity. But she later saw its limits, moving towards needing unmediated, unreflective responses, direct intuition, not just abstract reason. She also saw herself extending the determinism of Descartes and Spinoza to all natural phenomena, everything subject to mechanical laws, gravity, checked only by grace. Though in editor notes she might have overlooked God's possible margin of indetermination and spontaneity, a little divine wiggle room within necessity.
So always engaging, synthesizing, pushing boundaries.
Instantly.
It sounds like it. And beyond philosophy, she reinterpreted classical tragedy through this unique Christian lens, challenging modern views. What was her take on tragedy and divine justice?
Her view of tragedy is really distinctive. She argued for a deep affinity between Christian and tragic visions, which are often seen as opposites. She contested the modern rationalist Christian idea that divine justice does not exist in tragic art, or that suffering is just punishment for sin. For Weil, God's goodness doesn't exclude, but actually necessitates a world where unmerited misfortune is a continual and a serious possibility.
God's goodness necessitates misfortune.
Because God loves us and respects the world's order, He allows us freedom to experience its harsh necessities, even innocent suffering. It's part of divine order for her. She argued that contemplating innocent suffering like Sophocles' Antigone choosing duty over law, or Shakespeare's King Lear's degradation, or even compulsory wrongdoing like Oedipus unknowingly committing terrible acts, or Racine's Phaedra consumed by illicit passion, can reveal divine justice, not negate it. She saw Lear's suffering leading him to a superhuman object of love, profound compassion born from his own ruin. Oedipus's eventual ascent to the God's will achieves spiritual purification, despite his fate. For Weil, the mystery of Christ's cross sanctifies innocent and degrading misery alike, elevating all suffering into a potential path to the divine.
So tragedy helps understand Christianity.
Yes, serves as a means of understanding Christianity in its essence and in its purity, seeing divine love not as removing suffering, but transforming it into spiritual realization. A call to look unflinchingly at darkness and find meaning.
Finally, as we bring this deep dive towards a close, her vision seems to really transcend specific religious boundaries, aiming for a broader, more inclusive understanding of spirituality. How did she envision this universalism?
Yes, absolutely. Weil points towards a universal Christianity in which all the other traditions retain their identity and place in the light of a supernatural love that accepts and makes room for them all.
Not blending them, but seeing them all in the same light.
Exactly, not syncretism. Each path keeps its integrity, but is seen as part of a larger divine tapestry, unified by universal love and grace. She saw an all-embracing humanism affirming all religions and all peoples in the fullness of the human pleroma, the total sum of divine attributes. In an age of conflict, she believed only the spirit that puts all traditions and peoples in relation to divine love and grace makes possible the fullness of humanity.
That sounds incredibly relevant today.
More needed than ever, perhaps. This is her full ecumenical content, a vision fostering understanding, challenging deadly exclusivism and spiritual elitism that only promise endless wars, eventually suicide. Her own journey, discovering Christ, seemed to free her spirit for even wider horizons, shown by her engagement with Hindu texts like the Bhagavad Gita. She was even willing to stay outside the institutional church, an outsider to outsiders, feeling it necessary for her to be alone, an outsider, alienated from every human context, to truly embrace this vast, inclusive spirituality.
A powerful invitation to look beyond our own narrow views. Wow. What an incredibly profound and, yeah, sometimes startling deep dive into Simone Weil. From rootedness and uprootedness to the poem of force, then attention and decreation. Her thought is just so rich, so uncompromising, deeply insightful. She really forces you to reconsider everything: patriotism, suffering, absence. You can truly see why her ideas resonate so strongly today, almost a century later.
Indeed. Her central message, you could say, is about cultivating this intense, detached attention, an unflinching gaze at reality, openness to others, a selfless orientation towards the divine. It's a challenging path, no doubt, demands transformation, often discomfort. But it promises profound insights into freedom, justice, the purest love. For a while, this inner work, this uninterrupted interior prayer that is pure attention, becomes the only perfect criterion of good and evil. Not external rules, but radical authenticity, embodying your convictions.
So, what does this all mean for you, listening? Maybe the biggest takeaway from Simone Weil is that the most profound insights aren't always in grand theories, easy answers, or comfortable certainties. They're often found in the impossible, in the void, the contradictions, the courageous willingness to truly look at affliction in the world, in ourselves, with unflinching, compassionate attention. What stands out to you about Simone Weil's challenging, radical ideas? How might they prompt you to look at your own experiences of connection, force, or even those small, seemingly insignificant moments of attention in your day?